Hi. So this is kind of a continuation of I just started a live stream on YouTube, and we got cut off in the middle of an explanation about the subtle energy field of the planet and what's been happening. So I'm going to do my best to pick up where I left off. Sorry for that. So I was saying that there's three orders of ley lines. There are those that are created by the Earth, those that are created by the Sun, and those that are created by the centers of galaxies. Galaxies and the Sun radiate cosmic radiation, what we call cosmic radiation. It's basically the full spectrum of radiation from alpha, beta, gamma, X-rays, and that sort of thing. And when a beam of that interacts with our upper atmosphere, it creates these neutrinos, these subatomic particles that pass through everything on the planet. And but every once in a while, one of them will hit something at the core of the Earth. And when that happens, or in the vicinity of the core, when that happens, it generates a sound wave that radiates out in a spherical direction. And what they all have in common is that point that's at the center, and enough of them, some things got hit that it propagates a wave coming from the center of the planet, the center point of the planet, radiates to the surface, and we experience that as this matrix of what appear to us like lines going across the surface of the planet. But in actuality, it's a whole field, it's a whole matrix, a whole pattern of these lines. All the lines are connected. Obviously, they're connected to the center of the Earth and to one another as they pass through one another. And at the nodes where ley lines cross one another, they create these sound structures that have a form that is different for every node, depending on what lines come through it. That form has a sacred geometric form, but that sacred geometric form sits within a sphere, and the sphere sits on top of another sphere that's just below the surface of the Earth. And so there's one above the surface and there's one below the surface. And the node itself is that point where the two spheres touch. So if you have an Emperor Dragon line, which let's say this is 2019, and when all the Emperor Dragon lines were 50 paces wide. So that point where the two spheres touch would be 50 paces wide, right? And the structure above and below the Earth would be, pretty immense. But now that point is, at the moment, that point is between 3.5 to 4 miles wide. So that energetic structure, those spheres are friggin' huge, and the projection is that they're only gonna get bigger. Remembering that these structures are all created consisting of low frequency sound waves. So they're sound structures. And it's important to remember that everything in the physical existence is made of vibration. So everything is being affected, everything in existence, everything on this planet, everyone on this planet is being affected by these vibrations. and there's no way to stop them. There's it's not gonna, it's not going to stop. They have a life of their own, and right now, one of the things that's happened is that the solar system has been moving through a region of space where it was obscured by a cloud of dust from receiving streams of cosmic radiation from at least 3 other sources. And since over the past decade or so, the solar system has slowly been moving out of that region of space, making it more a clearer path between the Earth and these 3 new sources. Now, these 3 sources, these galactic centers, have been beaming their cosmic radiation at the planet all along, and in past periods, when before the solar system went into this cloud of dust, there's evidence of these ley lines having been where they are, or in the vicinity of where they are right now, but they disappeared for a number of years. And I'm feel pretty confident in saying that at least this one that goes across America from California to Virginia has been gone for about at least 500 years, if not longer. I can edit in another one of these videos. I can go into why I think that. But I want to get back to what you can, what good is this information to know, and what good, what can we do with it, and what effect is it having on us? So the best, as I said in the other video, and I'll say it again, you'll get tired of hearing me say it. The best use of this information is daydreaming. The trance state between when that we naturally go into with our eyes open is when our brainwave pattern, our dominant brainwave pattern, is vibrating between 6 and 8 vibrations per second. What's unique about that little window is when our dominant brainwave pattern is between 6 and 8 cycles per second, it's in a harmonic with the base frequency of the Earth, which is 7.83 hertz, or 7.83 vibrations per second. It's also in a harmonic with the ambient sound of the universe, what's known as the divine vibration, which has a wavelength of 7.23 centimeters. And when we are in that 7 harmonic, when our dominant brainwave pattern is in that 7 harmonic, then we experience this trance, but with our eyes open, we can't, go to sleep. We are in that trance state. Everybody knows it just feels really good to daydream, right? And we get ideas, we get inspiration, we get a connection to our higher self, if you will. And when you're in that state, you can ask questions and information comes. So my focus going forward is the promotion of daydreaming as a spiritual practice. Everybody can do it. You don't need to do drugs. You don't need anything other than the desire to do it. And the key to doing it as a spiritual practice is doing it willfully and consciously entering that state, and staying there at will. So if you come to an awareness that you have been daydreaming, to consciously stay there, choose to stay in that space and see what happens. So as I was saying, there are three orders of subtle energy lines: the earth generated ones, the solar generated ones, and the galactic generated ones. And the earth generated ones are friggin' everywhere. So you don't have to be on a line. You don't have to be on a node. You don't have to know where the nodes are. You don't have to know what the grid is or anything, because it's the ultimate Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi because we can, right? The ultimate Wi-Fi is you can tap into it, or Bluetooth, right? Wireless connection is you can tap into the field at any time. You've been tapped into the field all along. You cannot be disconnected from this field, because it's universal. But on this planet, it has certain characteristics, and it goes through fluctuations and whatnot. And right now, it's going through a fluctuation in the direction of increasing in potency and prominence. There's a projection that. Okay, so at the solstices and equinoxes, this is why I've been doing all of these measurements to monitoring the width of the Emperor Dragon Line as it crosses the Pacific Coast Highway in Big Sur and in Monterey, and since 2019, since the December solstice of 2019. And as I've been doing it, I've been doing it primarily at the solstices and equinoxes for a reason. Rory McQuestion, who I highly recommend, if you can look up roryduff.com, get his newsletter. He's on Instagram as the geobiologist. Highly recommend that you follow his work. He's written several books on the subject, and as have I. And but he's a classically trained. For those of you that don't know, he's a classically trained British geologist, and in his early career, he spent 7 years working 1,000 feet underground in a gold mine in southern Africa. So you can imagine that made him tremendously sensitive to energy. And he learned how to dowse at that time and has been teaching people how to dowse ever since. So for more than 25 years, he's been teaching people how to dowse. He's a master of dowsing, what's called distance or remote dowsing, where you're not actually where you are in the place that you're dowsing. And so he's been able to dowse these lines around the world. At the same time, he performed one of the, if not the most comprehensive study of the subtle energy system of the planet, but primarily of southern England, back in between 2008 and 2010. So for about a year and a half in that period, he monitored and measured the ley lines in his vicinity in southern England on a daily and sometimes hourly basis. And what came out of that was an understanding of the fact that 4 times a year that the whole system goes through a change, and it goes like this. In the day leading up to the solstice or the equinox, back then the change would only take place all in one day. So if you're dowsing a line, if you stand in one place, you can actually kind of monitor the line moving to the left for a number of hours and then moving to the right for a number of hours. And that's basically the sine cosine. It's like a serpent, right? And that's the frequency of the line. And back then, the Earth-generated lines would do that sine cosine movement, the helix movement of like an S in between 10 and 16 hours. And during what he discovered is that on the solstice or the equinox, the lines would the Earth-generated lines would slow down to about the frequency of the solar-generated lines, which is about 24 hours, sine cosine. The emperor dragons at that time had a frequency of 48 hours, and they would speed up. That's when they were, before 2017, when there were only 3 pairs of emperor dragon lines on the planet. But even back then, he started to notice, leading up to about 2012, 2010, 2012, was that that the period in which all of the lines would vibrate at the same frequency, around 24 hours, was extending. It was going beyond just the day of the solstice, the equinox. First it was, a day and a half or 3 days, and then it was 6 days or 5 or 6 days. Up to this last equinox in the spring of 2022, it was 15 days when all the ley lines on the planet were vibrating at the same frequency. Also, the thing that happened is that when the 3 new Emperor Dragon pairs showed up in between 2017 and 2019, as the solar system moved out of this cloud of dust, the harmony period before that, it was a case of the Earth-generated lines would slow down, the Emperor Dragons would speed up, and they'd all meet at the solar line vibration. What's happened since the 3 new Emperor Dragon pairs, now there being 6 Emperor Dragon pairs going around the planet, all of the ley lines slow down to match the Emperor Dragons at 48 hours. And this is kind of another weird thing that's going on is that this Emperor Dragon pair that goes across America and goes to Uluru in Australia and goes around the world that way, it's the only one of the 5 Emperor Dragon pairs that vibrates. Its natural vibration its natural vibratory frequency is 72 hours. So it'll speed up during that harmony period to match the other ones, but then it only takes about 20 minutes to a half an hour for at the end of the harmony period for all the ley lines to go back to their normal vibratory frequencies. So as you can, before Rory started to do these studies in the late aughts. Nobody knew anything about, nobody alive anyway. The ancients knew all about it. It's obvious from what they've left us and in literature and the ancient the structures that they left. I just want to make a point right now about because we're at 20 minutes here, and I've been feeling for a while that I really need to kind of give more information about all this work that we've been doing. So about 4,000 years ago, we begin to see all of these structures being built. We call them Neolithic structures. Like Stonehenge and so forth. And I want to give some context. So you may have heard, if you're paying any attention to any of the other stuff any of the videos I've put out about this, or you may have been one of the handful of people that checked out my books or movies, documentaries about this stuff. So there's this gentleman who, if you're familiar with Yogananda, right? Yogananda's guru was his brother named Sri Yukteswar. And Sri Yukteswar was considered an incarnation of wisdom in his lifetime. He died in, I think, 1936. But in 1901 or 1903, he published a book called The Holy Science. In the preface of that book, he talks about, as a Vedic astrologer who has a house system that's still used to this day, he, extensive study of ancient Hindu scripture, as a member of the Swami order, especially, but definitely in the line of those swamis that have made it their purpose to introduce Kriya Yoga to the West. That was Yogananda's mission, and that's what he did. He came to the States around in the 19-teens, and he shared. He established the Self-Realization Fellowship, or SRF, and with the stated mission of introducing Kriya Yoga to the West. So Sri Yukteswar, in the preface to his book, he goes into a long and detailed explanation of this cycle that the Earth and the solar system go through. That's a 24,000-year cycle, and it's all from these ancient Hindu scriptures. And what it talks about is that the solar system has a twin. And what astronomy knows is that most stars are at least binary, if not more stars than two. It's very rare for there to be a star that is all by itself. And it's most likely that the solar system began with a twin that where they were both sharing the same puddle of matter, and eventually the sun got most of it. But the twin is something, maybe something that is as small as Jupiter or Saturn, what astronomers call a brown dwarf. And so these two heavenly bodies, they do this little dance with one another, and the solar system's version of that dance is an egg-shaped orbit, and the sharp end of the egg is when it's doing a little do-si-do around its twin that goes further out into the galaxy, the outer edge of the galaxy, whereas the fat end of the egg of the sun's orbit brings the solar system closest to the galactic center. And what he said, the significance of this is in that 24,000 year egg-shaped orbit, the closer the solar system gets to the galactic center, the easier it is for incarnate souls to perceive and manifest divinity. And the further away from the galactic center it gets, the more challenging it is for incarnate souls to perceive and manifest divinity. And so, according to him, we were at that furthest point from the galactic center in the year 499 AD, and we've been moving back towards the galactic center ever since. And just anecdotally, if you look at your own life, in our lifetime, we have seen and felt nothing but an acceleration, right? Everything is speeding up. The population is speeding up. Our perceptions are speeding up. Our intuitions are speeding up. The news cycle is speeding up. There's nothing that's slowing down. And it's only going to become more like this over the next 10,500 years, because we are about 1,500 years away from that point that is the apex of the egg-shaped orbit, moving back towards the galactic center and into the quote-unquote golden age, so to speak, right? As we do this, we, as a species, will become more and more sensitive to subtle energy. It's inevitable. The generations that will come after us will be ever more sensitive to energy, to the point where they could not even conceive of how we could stand the dense world that we live in. The difference between the effect of this cycle on human existence is the difference is a difference in densities. The key here is density. The further from the galactic center we are, the more dense existence is. The closer we get to the galactic center, the less dense it is, and the less density we have to deal with. There are in the preface to that book, his book, The Holy Science, he talks about a scripture that tells the story of an ancient Hindu king who abdicated his throne to his son and retired with all of his retinue up into the Himalayas to meditate for the rest of his life, because they lived at a time that was about 4,000, several thousand years BC. And so they were coming into the opposite of where we are now, in the orbit, where it becomes ever more dense. So for us, there's this acceleration, right? For them, there was a deceleration, which meant that people were basically getting stupider, It was becoming more challenging to even communicate with one another. And in that space, that's when we begin to see the construction of objects, stone objects especially, that placed on the Earth grid at the time as a means of continuing to communicate between the dimensional planes. So one of the, what we know of as the character of these energetic nodes, a lot of it comes from what the ancients have told us about them, which is that at the solstices and equinoxes and the cross quarter days, which are the lunar event closest to the beginning of November, February, May, and April. August. At each one of those points, the veil is thinner between the physical plane and the metaphysical planes. Everything that's less dense than here. and it's easier for there to be communication between the dimensional planes. So in other words, the way they put it is it's easier to communicate with the dead at those times, or with the ancestors. It's easier to communicate with to maintain communication with the ancestors. Now, before Christianity, the majority of the population of the world recognized that they were a big part of their spirituality was involved in communication with the ancestors. The ancestors being anybody on the other side of the veil, the energetic barrier that separates the physical reality from the metaphysical. And so as the solar system moved further away from the galactic center, it became more and more challenging, ever more challenging to be able to maintain that connection. And until it got to the densest part of the orbit, in 499 AD, which is the fall of the Roman Empire. That century of 500 to 600 AD has widely been seen by historians as the most challenging time to be on the planet. There's actually a video on YouTube called "The Worst Year to Be Alive," and it's in that century. If you think back to what was going on then, it was common. It was commonly accepted. Slavery was commonly accepted. It was okay for one human being to assume that they owned another, and there were bureaucracies around people owning one another, which is, to us, it's ludicrous. But there is so much that we're doing right now that our future generations, 7 generations from now, they're going to look back on what we're doing right now and say the same thing. How could you raise animals for food? Don't get me wrong, I love a good steak as well as the next person, but I'm just saying that the pain and anguish that another creature feels, one of the main things that is happening through this energetic acceleration of the Earth's subtle energy field, the effect on humanity, if you don't take anything away from this conversation, this diatribe, lecture, whatever you want to call it, empathy. The world is destined to become so empathetic that it will correct itself. That's what we're engaged in right now. The average person's level of empathy, it's human. It's human nature to be empathetic. Every person is an empath. Our descendants are going to be exponentially more empathetic than we are. And those of us on the edge right now, especially through the COVID quarantines that forced the population of the world to go into solitude and at some point to go through self-reflection, it's had an effect of heightening people's sensitivity to subtle energy, and that is only going to become more so. That's the takeaway. I mean, the best use of that is to recognize that that's happening, and to use your vision, use your daydreaming skill to navigate, to spiritually navigate your way through the world. That's the optimum use of empathy. It's also helpful to the more empathetic you become, it's vitally important to develop the discipline of being able to disconnect from any source around you. So, like, as an example, if you're sitting in the hot spring and there's these conversations going on around you that you don't really want to be focusing on. You want to be going into your own space. Being able to disconnect from energetically from whatever anybody else is saying is a really useful tool, ability to cultivate. Being able to exercise the discipline to disconnect, to focus your attention on whatever it is that is valuable to you. It's vitally important, because when you are as you become more and more empathetic, you're going to, when you encounter something, whatever you focus on, you're going to start to get information about that person, that situation, that environment. You're going to be able to pick up whatever's happened. You can tap into whatever's happened in that place if you want to. And it's really important to be able to be very clear about what it is that you're trying to tap into and what it is that you don't want to know anything about. And so that cultivating that discipline of mind and heart and spirit to say, no, I need to focus on this right here. That's really it's going to help you, because otherwise you'll just be distracted, and find yourself caught up in things that you don't care about, and giving your energy and attention to things that are not necessarily what you know in your heart is what you should be, focused on. So, empathy. So imagine what's happening right now, and what's been happening for the last decade is, at this moment there's over very close to 7.9 billion souls incarnate, and all but a handful of them are aware of the information that I'm sharing with you right now. Yet every one of them is experiencing the effects. So when people imagine if we as a species begin to be aware, cultivate an awareness of these effects, we come into a place of being able to consciously direct the ship. The ship being what direction our species goes from here. And I can just kind of leap forward for you in terms of where we're headed. Where we are right now is just growing pains. They're very severe growing pains. We are, especially with one of the best examples is what's happening in the Ukraine. It is revealing so much. Another example is the fact that the United States is going through its Pluto return. So Pluto takes 248 years to go round. Pluto is the planet that rules divine communion through sex, death, transformation, rebirth, hidden knowledge, shared resources, power, immortality, reveling in the great mystery and sharing out its secrets. It's all about the process of death, transformation, and rebirth, right? All power, because Pluto is Hades. It's the god of the underworld, right? Where all wealth comes from, and all power comes from within, right? So Pluto, the last time Pluto was where it is in the sky right now was around the time that the United States was born, right? If you look at the chart of the United States, the astrological chart of the United States for July 4th, 1776, at I think it's 5:04 p.m. Apparently, that's when the Declaration of Independence was posted on the outside, was signed and then posted on the outside of the Independence Hall where it was drafted and ratified. The Pluto was at approximately 27 degrees Capricorn at that moment. And right now it is within 2 or 3 degrees of that point. And when a planet has its return to a place, there's a period of when it returns in its orbit to where it was at an earlier period of the spiral of its journey through the cosmos around the sun. There is a period of review and recalibration, and that's what we're going through right now. We've been tested, the past 10 years, and Pluto, it's not in a hurry. It's actually slowing down. It's moving. It's been moving. It has an egg-shaped orbit as well, and it just passed the sharp end of the egg around 2000, between 2000 and 2010, and so now it's going to be slowing down, and it's about to pass out of Capricorn and into Aquarius. And as it passes out of Capricorn, it has to do with world power structures, right? The basic structure of the world. And Pluto is kind of ripping that up right now. It's testing us in the sense of, do you want things to be like this, or do you want to make things another way? And in this process, we've seen, like in the last election, we saw in the last several election cycles, we've seen our power structures challenged and tested, stress tested, and what we found is that they don't necessarily, they certainly need help, right? They need to be amended. They need to be shored up. We all want, we've got a good foundation, but there's some things that need to be adjusted. And because at this moment in history, the United States is the third largest population on the planet as a nation. China and India are way beyond us, and they're four times larger in population. But in terms of affluence, we have the largest, most affluent population. And basically, you could have said 2,000 years ago that all roads led through Rome, and right now, economically, the United States is the world economy is reliant on the United States as an engine. And because of that, how goes the United States politically, the world reflects that. When there's a sneeze in Washington or New York or LA, the rest of the world feels that, right? And so, I've been watching the population harmonic for the past since there were 5 billion in the early 90s, and I was wondering, like, what's going to happen when the number of incarnate souls matches the base frequency of the Earth at 7.83 cycles per second. Now, the base frequency of the Earth is caused by the 3,000 to 4,000 lightning strikes that hit the Earth every day. It rings the bell of the planet, right? And creates this vibration of this sound, low frequency sound wave that is 7.83 hertz. So what I was thinking about is, like, what happens when the number of incarnate souls matches, is in a harmonic with the base frequency of the earth. And for 2 decades I was meditating on that, and there's no way I could have predicted what did happen, right? What happened was COVID and the COVID quarantines. And as we approached that point, the year and a half before we got to that point, February of 2020 in the States was when the COVID hit and the COVID restrictions came into play, and everybody was forced into quarantine. And in that space, everybody had to go, spend a lot of time in solitude and self-reflection. And who would have known, who could have predicted that would be like worldwide? That the majority of the population of the world would be into forced self-reflection of like, what am I doing here? What's important in life for me? What's my spiritual mission? Those sorts of questions, right? The week of the presidential election in the United States in 2020 was the week that we reached that point. So I said it was a year and a half. It wasn't a year and a half. It was 8 months? 9 months gestation period. The first week of November of 2020, we reached the point of where the number of incarnate souls matched the base frequency of the earth. I was beside myself. I was, especially when the regime that was in power was flushed out, because it bodes well for where we're going from here. Because up until that point, from 2016 until 2020, it was a case of 1/3 of the population reacting to this heightened sensitivity that's coming from the subtle energy field, reacting in fear. And their reaction in fear supporting authoritarian regimes. And we're going to have that. But we cannot have 1/3 of the population ruling 60% or 70% of the population. That's a recipe for revolution. And luckily, we have a democracy where we can have an electoral revolution instead of one with guns and people killing one another, which is not really the goal, obviously, in the long run. The goal is to transcend the need for violence, right? For settling discord with more dense actions, right? The goal is not to contribute to the density, but to transcend the density, right? And so here we are. The Emperor Dragon lines that have shown up on the planet in the past since 2017, between 2017 and 2019, have flipped the script, because up until then, all of the ley lines sort of, they were equal. They were in a balanced state where the Emperor Dragons would speed up and the the Earth-generated ones would slow down, and they all meet at the solar lines. But now, with these 3 new Emperor Dragon lines, at the solstices and equinoxes, during the harmony period, it takes about 3 days before leading up to the solstice or equinox, for them all to align and begin to vibrate at the same frequency. The frequency that they're vibrating at is the Emperor Dragon's frequency. So, and the Emperor Dragons themselves are expanding in width, right? And that means the nodes themselves that include the Emperor Dragons are only expanding and getting more larger as time goes on. It's only going to, this is not going to, there's no off switch, there's no going back, there's no going down, there's no turning it down or turning it off or anything like that, and no one is in charge of it, right? However, we as a species have it within our power to direct it. And we do this every day, and it's what we've done all along. We direct the course of our species and life on this planet through our dreams and visions. And our power to do that is only going to become more and more potent as time goes on. Straight up. Because we're becoming more sensitive to subtle energy, because we're becoming more empathic, and this generation of souls that are on the planet right now agreed to incarnate now specifically to be that change, to be that, to be these sensitive and ever more sensitive beings through this transition period. That was our spiritual agreement as a soul group. We are coming into, as we come into more and more sensitivity, the planet itself is becoming more and more, the energetic field, the subtle energy field of itself is becoming more and more prevalent and more of a factor in our daily lives. And resulting in us being more empathetic, or at least having the empathetic potential. Empathy is something that you actually have to choose on all levels in order for it to be effective. In order for you to be effective with it, you have to invest your consciousness and your willingness. And so imagine if a critical mass of incarnate souls use this information I'm sharing right now, that we begin to embrace the notion of daydreaming as a spiritual practice, recognizing that our sleep state even is a sacred thing, because when you are asleep, you're in delta, your brainwave pattern is below 6 vibrations per second, and you are in direct communication with every soul does it, and every soul is in direct communication with the subtle energy realms, the metaphysical realms, when you're asleep. And you spend a third of your life in that state, right? So if you live to be, I think it's 82 years old, you will live 30,000 days, and you will have spent at least 10,000 of those days in unconscious trance state, sleep, right? So how much of those 30,000 days will you spend in daydreaming trance? And the cool thing about daydreaming trance is you are conscious and you can direct it, right? You can make choices, conscious choices of what to focus on. So imagine if a sizable percentage a critical mass of people embrace this information, what direction the world, and start steering the ship with full conscious awareness instead of with fear. Because, when you have news outlets that are dedicated to the old model of if it bleeds, it leads, filling the airwaves with what you should be afraid of, so that they can sell you more stuff to be afraid of, so that they can, make sure that their advertisers have enough eyeballs to, keep their coffers full. When you have that dynamic going on, right now, that dynamic, which is, it was a business model that worked for less than a century, but it's time to let it go, or to take charge of it through, envisioning the future that you want to see. Because if you envision the future under these conditions, if you envision the future as what is being put forward as something to be fearful about, then you're going to have plenty to be afraid of. But we all know, if you just turn off that energy, be very disciplined in yourself about what. It's important to know, to watch the news. It's very important to watch the news, because all the news that you see, someone has spent billions of dollars to get you focused on that idea. The churches and religions use this before. I mean, the whole idea of going to church once a week on the same day, during the same time of day, in these structures that are designed to transmit subtle energy into a spiritual grid, right? That's why all these religions were warring against one another, because they wanted to get as much of the population and as much of the real estate involved focused on what they felt was important for life, right? So you had the Catholic Church ruling over most of Europe, and the Islam ruling over most of Africa and all the way over to Indonesia. And you have all these religions that they wanted to, and still to this day, they want to rule the world, because they feel that they understand what the purpose of life is and what makes life worth living, even though that they were willing to just mow over everything else and everybody else that disagreed with them, and put people to the sword, or kill them if they disagreed with them. And so in this day and age, you have these corporate entities that they exist to make money, to make profits for their shareholders. And like News Corp, News Corporation. I mean, News Corporation says it says everything you need to know. It's a corporation whose business is news, and that news is going to be whatever it is going to make money for their shareholders, right? So it's important to watch that, and when as you watch it critically, and say, why does somebody want me to know this? Because you notice how they are all focused on the same thing, no matter what the channel is or whatever, or the newspaper is. They all have the same. They all have the same script at the same time, right? But as a person who spent a lot of time in the wilderness, where I've been disconnected from that, I'm not always hearing the news. I'm not reacting to whatever the latest thing to be afraid of is, right? I have, a perfect example is I understand that there was a time back in the 90s when there was this whole thing that happened around O.J. Simpson. I didn't know anything about it. I would have made the perfect juror because I was in the wilderness, right? It wasn't until after the whole thing had gone its whole arc and everything like that, when I overheard a conversation and somebody told me about what had happened. And but I understand that the effect of that O.J. Simpson trial verdict registered on the subtle energy field of the planet. There's a project called Heart Math, right? I highly recommend you look it up. Hold on a sec. And there was this global research project going on at the time where there were all these random number generators that were not networked, and they were placed all over the world, and all they did was generate random sequences of numbers. And what people noticed in this experiment was that there have been certain moments when all the number generators on the planet began to generate the same exact sequence of numbers. And one of those times was when the O.J. Simpson trial verdict was announced. So what that tells you is that we collectively have the ability to affect the subtle energy field of the planet. Another time was 9/9/2001. So 2 days before 9/11, they started to synchronize the number generators. There have been a couple of other times since then. I'm not really up on them, but suffice to say that if that experiment doesn't prove anything, anything else, it proves that that our thoughts, feelings, emotions, dreams, and visions steer the ship. And in the future, that's exactly how the ship will be steered, is by people collectively deciding, consciously or unconsciously, what direction they want to invest themselves in. And so that's one of the main reasons why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. I feel very blessed to be able to do it. I feel it's really bizarre, the story that's led me to this moment. From that day back in 1994, where I happened to turn up a dirt road in the rain, just looking for a place to park, and I discovered that. That led me to discover that archaeological site at the top of that mountain. And then, 30 years later, my friend Rory sends me a satellite photograph of the node at the top of that mountain, which just happens to be 100 yards away from the archaeological site I discovered in 1994. When things like that happen, you have to, I have to acknowledge just the amazingness of it all, just being guided, right? We're all being guided. Everything that happens is spiritual at the root. It's the only way it can occur. And we ignore that at our detriment. But I digress, which is my way of digression is the way of filling in the story, I guess. All right, so it's been 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 30 seconds. And if you've listened at all thus far, I hope that you If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to contact me directly. I've got a pretty broad. Just Google my name, and there's all sorts of connections there. My websites and art projects and everything going forward are all about this. They're all about using the subtle energy potential of my life and my work. All of my paintings, my books, my music, I have to recognize as shamanic, and I create shamanic music, and the purpose of that is to create work that people can use as to inspire self-induced trance states. Daydreaming Club, that's my gig. Daydreaming Club. I have daydreamingclub.com, but stay tuned for that brand experiment. I'm also doing David America as a brand art experiment. I just this past week released 3 singles as sort of like a test of this mechanism for releasing music under that my new artist name, David America. So there's 3 singles on all the streaming services supposedly now, Spotify and Apple Music and Tidal and all the rest of that. It'll give another couple of days for it to completely propagate. So if you plug any of those titles in right now, I don't know what will show up, because it's just been drips and drabs since last Friday. So within the next 2 weeks, it should all have settled out. One of those pieces is called the Requiem for a Million Souls. The inspiration for that was, the milestone in the United States of 1 million people having passed through due to COVID. But I composed it down in Big Sur at the where the Emperor Dragon crosses the road, and I shot it there too, at Jade Cove. So there's a video on YouTube you can watch, 30-minute video that is trance-inducing, beginning to end. But the musical release is I just saw is up as well, so you can watch it on YouTube Music, and the YouTube channel itself. I mean YouTube website itself. But there's a couple of other pieces. One is called Chip, another is called Opus, and those are a combination of me extemporaneously talking about life, the universe, and everything, set to some of my original shamanic music. And I'm really excited about that. So I'm going to get off now and get to the hot springs for the rest of the day. I'm headed down to Torrey Pines after the doctors in LA to do some more flying, and I'm actually going to try to do a live stream while I'm flying down there. Kind of excited about that. But anyway, check me out if you have questions about this information. I'm totally, if anybody wants me to do interviews for, like Coast to Coast or for podcasts or anything like that, I'm open to doing that. So just hit me up, as they say in modern parlance. So this collection, see that little basket right there? I got that basket last summer, full of plums, and I got it specifically for the basket. I knew it was like the perfect thing to latch onto that table and to just stick all the sticky stuff, like knives and pens and toothbrushes and all that kind of stuff together. So that's what you've been looking at. And this is my garbage for the back, and my pants, and see all the bungee cords. These bungee cords are basically keeping this table from, when I go around corners, the table from collapsing into this part, which it did many times before I figured out the bungee cord solution. So while it may look chaotic, it's serving a grand purpose, creating order that I can live with, which is the only kind of order that's worth having, right? Love and light.